Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for the invitation. It is a pleasure to be here and to share different thoughts about this interesting theme. So I'm going to show you some of my drawings. And the presentation is, the following presentation is divided in two parts. The first part shows some drawings through the photographs of Giorgio De Vecchi, who tried to investigate a bit of my process, a bit of my method. And the following part is dedicated to some of my references, the references that inspired this series. And so a part of my research focuses on the serial production of drawings that depict architectural typologies and objects with a particular spatial significance. Over the time, I have drawn things like tents, warehouses, and other objects like the parka, conceived as a kind of a pret-a-porter architecture shell. For the symposium Animals Inside, I am presenting a body of work called Cages Series, which I began in 2023, and that is still ongoing. It's a series entirely dedicated to cages for animals. From a technical point of view, all of my drawings are made with acrylic paint on white polypropylene sheets, so plastic sheets that are commonly used in industrial printing. I usually paint with worn-out brushes, which gave the surface a very rough and textured sign, like a handwriting. The acrylic paint is dense and dries very quickly. Then I scratch it with metal tools, like those used for modeling clay or other improvised objects, carving into the surface to bring out details, to bring back the white of the sheet. So it's really a process that goes by addition and then by subtraction. These black painted subjects stand out against a white, isotropic background that has, of course, the same weight and the same importance as the black. It is a warm and opaque white, which gives a sense of neutrality. The black defines the object, while the white opens up to an immense field of possibilities. In a more metaphorical sense, on one side, we have the cage, an enclosed object, a symbol of rigor and confinement, and on the other, the white void as the ultimate expression of freedom. The black masses and the white space around them interact with the edges of the sheet, which is with these physical limits. They create inner tensions within the format and visual connections to other drawings. Some figures are broken, cut by the edges of the sheet, leaving us to imagine what is happening out of frame. Each format works on its own, but also in dialogue with others, establishing fragile and unexpected relations, forming pairs or small series of drawings. This association can happen horizontally or vertically. So once again, the opposition reappears between the confinement of a single image and the freedom of association with other images, between the boundaries of the sheet, the unpredictable compositions that arise when those boundaries are crossed. Sometimes I use color, yes. In this case, I tried to unsuccessfully to replicate the light gray blue of galvanized steel and its peculiar sex appeal of the inorganic. Once again, the figures engage in dialogue, the cages break the edges of the sheet and seek connections with other formats. In completeness, partial visions, the auto frame becomes essential. As you can clearly see here, the table of my studio works as an assembly line where I mount and demount the different formats. I have to admit that my drone series don't usually begin with precise theoretical reasoning. They start from an aesthetic or formal fascination, or sometimes a technical one, for a particular subject. Only afterwards does a more conscious research phase begin, one that tries to understand what kind of question the work raises and what kind of contribution it might offer to architectural theory and to architectural design. In this case, the Animal Inside Symposium gave me the opportunity to dig deeper into this work and continue it. When it comes to my working method, I don't usually do in-depth research through books or collection of objects. If anything, that kind of research tends to come later when the drawings are already finished. Usually I work from quick online searches on my phone or my laptop, selecting the subjects that interest me the most and that I think might work within the format. I rarely keep folders of images on my computer. I almost never save files. I simply look at the image on my phone and then I try to reproduce it in my own way. So I draw them in session that lasts few hours and they are done. In this case, I went back and traced the images that had originally caught my attention. I'd like to show you some of them. The cage is, of course, an object of confinement, and it's also a symbolic expression of human power over other living species. If we think on the nature of this relationship between humans and animals, we can simply look at the cage as a design problem. That's what I did. I look at various cage designs and compare them. I studied cages for rabbits, small rodents, birds, reptiles, and also devices that divide domestic space for dog and cats. These are all products that exist on the market today, even though my initial investigation wasn't limited to any specific time or culture. I also drew older objects like fish traps and these traditional Japanese cricket cages. You heard before something about these cages. So the film I'm now focusing on is that of the domestic interior and its immediate extensions, like patios, porches, terraces, gardens, courtyards, and small stables. That's because I believe the domestic interior cannot be understood without its relationship to the outside space, even when it deliberately stands in contrast to it. Living with animals has often forced us to blur the boundaries between inside and outside. Sometimes this has created a fracture. The idea, for instance, that nature must be kept out and only its domesticated version can enter the house, the dog or the potted plant in the winter garden. Other times, it has created a greater form of sharing, as in old rural houses where humans and animals live together within the same architectural body. Dogs, cats, courtyards, birds, and silkworms, like in this masterpiece scene in the famous movie by Bernardo Bertolucci, Novecento, with silkworms and humans living together under the same roof. In many of the cage designs that I have studied, I found themes that are very familiar to modernist and contemporary architecture, and even to some recent researches in the field of industrial design. And thinking of constructive principles, spatial organization, and modularity. They really are application of architectural criteria developed for humans, but transferred to the design of animal devices. And in the way I've drawn them, these objects start to shift. They become architectures for humans. And at the same time, human architectures start to resemble cages. The industrial scale production of cages naturally introduces techniques of prefabrication and the use of semi-finished materials as structural elements. The cage house is defined by pure tectonics. It becomes habitable only when objects are added inside it. This grammar produces highly redundant compositions based on repetition and modularity. Differences and repetitions create families of elementary volumes and their later deformation, adjusting to functional and decorative needs. Some cages are made with modular grid walls connected by joints that allowed endless variations in compositions and scale. They can develop horizontally or vertically across several levels. The range of possibilities is quite vast, as can be seen from the diagrams provided by the manufacturers. It is a matter of adopting one or composing your own. And within this orthogonal rigidity, the diagonal figure of the ramp appears, a vertical connection between levels. The inside of the cage is a kind of interpretable void, a space that can host floating elements. The structural parts define enclosures that can be filled with modular inserts, adapting to different species, movements, and behaviors, or with informal floating elements. There are also modular systems with flexible joints that create simple, variable enclosures. They adapt to the ground they find, maybe a floor, a patch of grass, or a specific base. In other cases, they lean on the existing walls of a space to define a smaller zone. Cages are, in general, spatial devices indifferent to the ground. They don't have a fixed orientation or a pre-established relationship with the place they occupy. Their position can change according to the needs of their inhabitant. Some cages rest on wheels, introducing the theme of movement, another one of our architecture's great utopias. Other rises off the ground on pilotis, with wheels or without. grouped together over terraces structures. Industrial components are sometimes combined with natural materials, for instance, wooden branches that reconstruct a fragment of habitat, staging the displacement of the wild within the domestic. It's an attractive contrast, inorganic and organic, manufactured and raw. Hybridization with different materials produces material contrasts, and hybridization with other typologies produces identity contrast. Some objects are half cage and half glass case, combining the permeable, the semi-permeable, and the impermeable through different gradients of transparency and porosity. This allows for different environmental conditions within the same object. The ground level might recreate an atmosphere and a way of living that feel closer to the natural one. Other examples combine the cage with the tent, joining a rigid system with a flexible temporary one. Some designs even challenge the idea of confinement. Their openings are placed in ways that allow the animal to move freely in and out, redrawing the relationship between inside and outside. In this case, the outside space becomes part of the animal's artificial dwelling, and the dwelling in turn becomes part of the outside. This cage trap is placed in the domestic space and can then be transported elsewhere with a handle. It can be used to save an animal, for example, a wild animal that gets too close to a human settlement and needs to be returned to its habitat, but at the same time, it could be used to imprison and kill it. This example brings us back to James Ballard's High Rise and the warning he gave to architects. The cage can be a device for peaceful cohabitation or a lethal device. The animal cage, in a sense, is like a matryoshka. It reproduces many of the constructive and spatial logics that human architecture, like the human architecture that contains it. The rules embedded in these devices determine the behavior of their inhabitants. In this way, the cage seemed to echo some of the utopias and monads of modernist and contemporary architecture. The simplification of volumes, the use of industrial materials and construction systems, new relationship to contexts, the creation of hybrid spaces that are neither inside nor outside, just to name a few. Perhaps this ambiguous shared language should suggest us a real common ground between humans and animals, starting from the design of cages in the domestic space and extending outward. Maybe it can help us to imagine new architecture that foster interspecies dialogue and the kind of coexistence we are all looking for. Thank you.